centered on location and maps and local, because I just think there's something really amazing happening with mobile maps. And so I really like to work on problems that affect people every day. And I had this realization last fall that basically I couldn't remember the last day when I hadn't used maps on my phone.
So you said something recently about, I believe it's 40% of Google Maps usage is via mobile now?
So we crossed over on Christmas and on New Year's Day for the first time, which happens a lot, and then it edged up to 40%. In May we were seeing crossovers on the weekends. So whenever people aren't at work, they start using their phones more. And we knew that we would cross over in June, and we crossed over last week. Which basically means we now see more mobile maps traffic than we see desktop maps traffic, which is certainly the first for Google. And maybe the first in the industry, that something that was born on the web and built on the web is now actually used more on the phone.
That's actually phenomenal. That's really interesting.
So
so as you start getting into that mapping stuff, then you, of course, are talking about location-based services and personal information and things like that. Now, here's my moderator's chance to ask you a harder question. I remember it was a year and a half ago, they asked him if there was something that you were taking part in. And he said something about not believing that anonymity is that important online anymore.
That what?
That anonymity?
Anonymity, yeah.
That you actually didn't like it that much. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, I think that privacy online is actually very important, but I think that privacy and anonymity are very different. And I think that when you look at some of what happens in terms of anonymous commenting and anonymous posting on the web, I think that there are some good things about that, but there are also some very bad things about that. And so while I do think it makes sense to have privacy, to basically say, well, look, yes, I'm going to make this comment, but I don't want everyone to see it, that's fine. But I think that the blasting them into everyone in the world and not needing to attach or have any kind of social responsibility for that content often is a problem. And I think that now, sort of interesting, I didn't even remember that I had made that comment 18 months ago, but I think when you look at things like Facebook's commenting system, was implemented on TechCrunch, and they were really happy with the results. Google Plus, which we just launched yesterday, really wants users to use their real names and gives lots of privacy controls in terms of who sees what you post, but we want all the posts to happen under a real name.
So, and the reason why that's interesting is because I'm also one of the co-founders of Ushahidi, right? And so I think about anonymity, personal information in a non-friendly environment.
Yeah.
And when we see this, backfire from Facebook, where people are getting singled out in unfriendly countries, how are you going to play with that as in the Google Plus realm?
You have to just have different rules. Right? In those kinds of environments, you need different rules, and you also need different tools. We saw this. We have something at Google that we're quite proud of, and it actually works really well in most cases, called Person Finder, where, like, for example, in the Japan earthquake, we had Person Finder up within 45 minutes. And we basically help people find, literally like thousands, if not tens of thousands of loved ones through it. Because basically it's a very simple system where you can put up a name and say, like, I'm safe, or you can put up a name and say, this is who I'm looking for. And we start to do the matching. And it's something we're really proud of. And when things started happening last year, for example, or I guess earlier this year in Egypt, immediately we were like, oh, Person Finder. And that was like sort of everyone's first instinct, and then we were like, oh, like not Person Finder, because we knew that all the names of people who, when they were posting and saying this is the person I'm looking for, if the police or secret police got a hold of that, we would have a list of all of the known protesters and all of those people, and so we didn't bring up Person Finder in that environment because we knew it would actually do more harm than good. So I think the rules are different in those types of environments, and you need different tools.
Right. So, now maybe we can step back out of the products there for a second. Tell us about being, the first Google female engineer and kind of how that worked for you. I know there's a couple female engineers here. There's a group of ladies that are here, part of the Kira Chicks, who are engineering group here in Nairobi. How was that for you?
Yeah. People ask me about the woman thing all the time, and I just can't answer it because at Google I'm not a woman, I'm a geek, and everyone else is a geek. So people are sort of like asking me like, what's it like to be at Google? And you're like, what's it like to be at Google if you're a geek? Like, it's awesome. like everyone's really excited about technology, and they're excited about like trying out the latest website or the latest gadget. And like, I still remember like the APMs have now filtered in, but I still remember there was this one time when we were having dinner up at one of our offsites, and Larry came by, and he was at one end of the table, and he was talking about how he had been testing out FM transmitters. And like, at the time, this was sort of in the early days of iPods, and probably most people in the world wouldn't even know what you could do with an FM transmitter, but one of my proudest moments of the APM program was like, all the APMs were like, most people in the world, if someone at one end of the table started talking about FM transmitters, they'd be like, change the subject to now, like all the APMs like leaned in, and they were like, what brands have you tried? How far is the range? Can you broadcast your iPod if you put it, in the trunk? And they were like asking all these questions. And so, I mean, like, it gives you sort of a flavor of what it's like to be in an environment where people are all excited about the applications of technology and where it's going. And that's really what drives my experience at Google, not the gender-based piece. So for me, I mean, I think that, I often say that passion is a gender neutralizing force, especially in technology, because it's so new and it's so fast moving that, that's really a much more defining part of the experience.
That's music to my ears. I love hearing that, as people know. So just to remind everybody, the hashtag for this evening is firechat, and it's at Marissa Mayer, it's her Twitter handle if you're going to be tweeting anything. In a few minutes, we're going to open up for questions. So I want you to start thinking about what questions you want to ask Marissa. And later on, all the people who filtered in a little bit later are the APMs that Marissa was talking about earlier. They're at the end of a 2-week stint of travel, so they're really, really tired. Perfect time to ask questions, because they won't be on their game. But they've been running around Nairobi doing different things today, and so a good chance for you to talk to them. At the end of it, we're going to actually ask them to come up, take 15 seconds each, and just say their name and the 2 products that they've been working on. That way, afterwards, you'll know who to talk to about Pro or Maps or whatever it is that you want to talk about. Marissa, so as you kind of look out there at the big ecosystem of the web, it's this open space, and one of the biggest hurdles in that space is the mobile side, because it's a closed space. It's run by, I consider them, one company town type of things. They're especially when you get to places like Rwanda or something like that, where there's only a couple operators and everything. How do you think the open web combats the closed mobile space?
I mean, I think it's still playing out, but I do think that, especially with the rise of smartphones, the ability to go everywhere on the web, yes, they're coming. They may not be coming as fast into many places as we'd like, but I do think that, like if you had told me, 4 years ago that I'd be searching as much on my phone and going to as many websites as I am, and frustrated because like somehow I've got like a skimmed down browser that can't handle Flash as well as I'd like it to, I would have been like, I don't understand what future that is, but I do think it's pretty amazing to see how far it's come. So I mean, with basically everyone having a computer of reasonably good quality in their pocket at all times, I really do think that the mobile world will access the open web. I also think that apps, even though they're often in very limited environments, are really critical. Knowing like, yes, I want to use Twitter to do this, or I want to use, Foursquare or Yelp or, any of these types of things. Google Places, hopefully, right? Like that is really useful.
And there's been a pretty strong bet by Google on the mobile web versus apps. Are all products moving that way for Google?
Yeah, I mean, we believe pretty strongly in HTML5 and OpenGL, and so I do think What's nice about that is if we can actually get that ecosystem up and functioning at scale, it basically means you don't need to, as a developer, keep coding for this platform and that platform, right? It's right at once. It works for desktop. It works for mobile, right? Like, I mean, it has some really nice properties across, frankly, all client software. We would really love to have a version of Google Earth that, rather than being native client code, was basically HTML5 and OpenGL.
Excellent. So we're going to start putting the mics out there. If you have a question that you'd like to ask, please raise your hand. Maybe show them to Jessica or Patrick, or I guess not Patrick, but Jessica, and she'll hand out the mic to you, and then we'll get started with the Q&A session.
Hi.
There we go.
Okay, my name is Katherine. I did work with Marissa for 3 weeks, and I would just like to add an information about my introduction. Marissa is very I would like people in the group particularly the ladies to know that Marissa is the youngest member working with postbag Google at 33. She's not just the first engineer at Google, but she's like one of the smartest and the highest working people at Google. On top of that, she's one of the best dressed ladies in the college. And she's also married. Thank you.
I'm really excited to see a friend here in the audience. So for those of you who missed the first part of what Katherine said, so Katherine came and actually lived with me in Palo Alto for 3 weeks and got to know me, got to know my husband, and we had a very good time. She also got to learn a lot about Google and at that time search. So it was a really, I think, good experience. I learned a lot about Kenya, and it also inspired me to start coming here. And so I've actually seen Katherine twice here in Nairobi since, and yeah, it was a really good experience.
I was going to say you should travel with Katherine all the time. She could be the Marissa Mayer pride. Yeah. Okay, next question. Saw a hand back there behind the pillar, way in the back.
My name is Mohammed. I'm from here. I asked about the Google Plus. Looks at maybe it's a demo. Looks absolutely amazing. I'm thinking that we're also comfortable on Facebook and Twitter. I think that's a good introduction.
I think the question was basically Google Plus. It looks really cool. It looks really interesting. But that said, everyone's on Facebook and Twitter already. How are you going to get past the inertia of getting people moved over to Google Plus? So we have a bunch of people here who've worked very hard on Google Plus, and they're eager and interested to talk to people about it. Basically, we think that we have a system that is highly differentiated and very engaging, and we've been using it a lot internally. We think the Circles model, the Hangouts model, the Sparks model are all things that are very compelling and have advantages over anything else that's out there right now. And so we think that that will be a big driver to get people to adopt Google+. That said, it's also important to recognize that Google systems already have a very good way of suggesting people you might want to interact with. Because of Gmail and because of Google Chat, there's actually a lot we can do in terms of building out very good suggestions. So you're not just constructing your group of friends from scratch. We can actually build on top of the contacts that we have from other activity on your account. And so we get your explicit permission to do that, and we have you add people explicitly in Google+, but we're not starting from scratch. So we think that, plus the differentiators that will be a real driver for adoption, that we think is a recipe for success with Google+.
My name is Dan Michael. I'm the CEO of a global group of Zoom. My question is, how important is product development for Google in terms of getting competitive advantage and being constantly the market leader? And what's the decision-making process in terms of when to roll out a new product, when to kill one, and such things?
Product development is the core of what we do. So, we've always believed that we are a technology company and that we're a products company. There's some companies ultimately become more about sales or more about marketing, like Google has, throughout its history stayed very focused on technology and very focused on products. And what that means is, there are some companies you can kind of play the game of just being like, is this company a sales-driven company or a marketing-driven company? Like Oracle. It's clearly sales-driven, right? The salespeople come back and say, build this and we'll be able to sell more. Like, Pepsi or Coca-Cola, marketing-driven companies. Let's do this, and we'll be able, to ultimately sell more soda. But Google, despite the fact that it's grown to be very large, has always been about technology and products. Engineers deciding, hey, there's something really interesting happening with the technology. We can build this, and it's those insights that really drive what we build. We believe very firmly. There's a wonderful saying from Henry Ford. From the automobile industry, where he basically says, if I had asked my customers what they wanted, they would have said faster horses, right? And so, we do believe that yes, you need to listen to user feedback, but for really fundamental insights into new product areas, you need to be looking at the overall trends. So, for example, Google Books, we looked at it and said, we think that basically very high resolution digital photography is going to become very cheap. We think that OCR is going to become very good, and we actually think that we can use those two facts together to be able to scan and search all the world's books. And looking at those types of trends and putting them together, similarly, because digital photography is very cheap, and we know that geolocation has become very accurate, we can do things like Street View, and basically drive a car down every street in the world to get a sense of what that place looks like. Also, it will help us build maps for places where there currently aren't maps. And we're working on all of those things, but really trying to understand what the trends are and what can be done now that we know about those trends. And so that's a lot of what the product development process at Google looks like. In terms of spinning up new products and or killing existing products, it's hard. It's always hard. It's a judgment call. You collect the best data you can. Google's always been a very consensus-driven company. We think that if you give a lot of smart people access to the same data, they often come to the same conclusion. So we've always been very open with information, so everyone can see, this product's getting used a lot, this product's not getting used a lot, right? Combining that insight that comes from that information with the insights around trends to try and understand, should we do this new thing or should we do something else? That's really what drives our decision-making process. But I think it's always hard. Last week we announced that we are closing down Google Health and Google Power Meter, and I think the reaction from a lot of people was, they're just closing these down now, and I think it's hard because there's always hope. It's always a fast-moving industry. It always feels like there might be something that just causes this to change any minute, and it is always ultimately a judgment call, deciding we just don't think this is ever going to really have the trajectory that we want it to have. So it's hard to make those decisions, but you do need to make them in order to be focused.
I have a question for you. The first one is, how is it being an engineer, being a woman at the same time? This one's a background where a country like Kenya, technical courses like the science, how the ladies is very low. The second question concerns Google Plus. Now that you say that part of the team is here, can I get an invite to
So the Google Plus invites, I think you can probably twist a couple of arms and you might be able to get an invite. I know that they opened up some invites yesterday and for a little while, and they are still processing their way through those. So I don't know that we've got invites open at the moment, but I'm sure if you exchange business cards with some folks later, they can probably keep your business card, and when we've got invites open, they can do that. And the first one, I think you asked me, what is it like to be an engineer? Talked a little bit about Kenya. I didn't catch some parts of it just because of the background noise.
I think the question was, here there's a very small percentage of women CS students, and I'm guessing it's a pretty small scale at Stanford compared to the rest of the world.
Yeah, I think it usually hovers between 15 to 20% of women of computer scientists are women. One of the disturbing things we've seen is that across all engineering fields, from 2000 to 2010, they all grew in terms of percentage of women, except for computer science, which actually experienced a decline. I think that's a problem. But I guess my overall perspective is, I just don't think we're producing enough computer scientists, period, right? Male or female. And I think that that's something that we really need to change. When you look at where technology is going, how many people we're going to need to have the ability to do coding, some high level and PhD level coding, some low level coding, we're going to need a lot more people who know how to program in some way. And a very U.S. lens on this, but I just heard some very interesting statistics recently. Because I think one thing that happens in high school, and particularly with women, is that, you know, you're good at math and science. So people sort of have their classic way of like, okay, I'm good at math and science, like maybe I'll be a doctor or I'll pursue this. But coming out of high school, there's a program called AP for Advanced Placement, where you can take tests and get college credit. And so a lot of the best students take those advanced placement courses. And basically 200,000 seniors take AP Calculus, right? Everybody who's good at math takes AP Calculus to try and get calculus credit. And only 14,000 take AP Computer Science. So, you know, it's basically, you know, the sort of the same set of students, you know, you're talking about basically 5% or thereabouts taking it. And then when you combine that with the stat, they've actually done a survey of Google engineers in terms of what percentage of them were exposed in some way to computer programming in high school, and the answer is 98%. So while I know it happens very early that, you know, whether or not you've seen computer science, you don't need to have done a lot of programming, but seen even a little bit of it, it really does give you a huge leg up later. And I do think that we've got to figure out how to take the people who are good at math and science or could be interested in computer science and get them exposed, even in a lightweight form, to that early on, because we need to just start producing a lot more computer scientists all over the world. And I think if you produce more computer scientists, even if the percentage of women is low, ultimately you'll have a lot more women computer scientists if we can get that number up.
Advice that you give to startups that are coming up in Africa in order to help them